muted and except you and me. And at the end of the interview, I unmute. Okay. Um, I think we can start. So, today's interview is with Ximbo, one of our moderators at C Sharp In, who has been a very helpful guy and is a really nice person altogether. So, Ximbo, could you give a short introduction about yourself?
Sure. I've been programming for about over a decade now. Um, got started in college, was more into math and just doing as little work and playing games as possible when I was in high school. And then in college, I got motivated to work a little bit harder and really studied up on computer science.
Yep.
And I've been working for a couple of different companies, but they're all kind of the same company too. I was working for initially Agilent, which is like a test and measurement company. So they write software to help people test and measure various things, usually hardware. And my group got sold off to a different company. That company split into two companies. No, sorry, that company was bought by a different company, which then split into two companies. And then I left. And in the meantime, the company I first started working with split into two companies. And so I joined back with one of the companies that it split into. So it sounds very complicated and I
It does.
changed jobs a lot, but I was working with the same people for a lot of the time. So that was pretty fun.
All right.
And
So back to the very origins, because let's start from the beginning of how you actually got into programming. Like you said, you were very into maths and studying it, if I understood correctly.
yes, it was a bit odd. Well, so when I was like 10, I decided that I wanted to make video games for a living. And
Mm-hmm.
then I didn't really veer from that path all through high school, but I didn't want to learn programming either because I figured I could learn that in college and that sounded like doing more work. I was not a very hard worker in high school. I played a lot of video games and generally goofed off, hung out with friends, that kind of thing. Um, so, so I guess it started when I decided I want to make video games. Then when I went to college and started programming, um, I realized I really liked programming, writing software. I got involved in some professors there in undergraduate research, learned more about that. By the time I graduated, I just looked at what it actually was like to make a video game company or work at a video game company. And you're not actually doing a lot of game design, and there's really hard
Mm,
hours,
yeah,
and a lot of it is kind of low level graphics engine work, which wasn't that appealing to me.
yeah.
So,
So regarding game development, what exactly did you like at it? Like the process of creating something that moves and looks cool is what I think I understood what you liked about it, the development, but not so much about the nitty gritty effort behind it, like the, as you mentioned, low level graphics design and stuff like that. So, what did normal software development have that games development did not?
sure. So I think what drew me to game development and still kind of interests me now and then is I like kind of telling stories and designing, game rules and game systems and things along that line, which is not so much what a game developer does. If you want to tell stories, then you're more of a writer or
Mm,
content creator or something along those lines.
yeah.
Um, then when I started working on software, a lot of it, kind of the math of it appealed to me, the logic of it sort of, um, I tend to compare it a little bit to like philosophy, where you're trying to take all of the universe or the world and categorize it and break it down and create rule systems and organize things and put things into pieces and connect them together. and there's a creation there and sort of a art to it that appealed to me.
Right. Gotcha. So, um, and when you were in university, what language were you using to program? Like, what was the one that started your path?
Yeah, so I started, I think the very first language I worked in. Okay, so I did do a little bit of programming when I was in before high school, even because I had a really old computer. It had this game where you were gorillas and you threw bananas at each other, and it was written in BASIC. And
Oh,
so I fiddled around with that a little bit to see if I could, make the banana blow up larger or something like that. And then I learned enough BASIC to write a really basic kind of choose your own adventure. But then when I started university, we started learning Java. And so everyone in, I went to Colorado State University, everyone their first year at the time took Java. And then your second year, you took C++.
right. Okay. And fast forward to your first job. What was your first job in programming that you actually got paid for?
Yes. So my first job was a paid internship. It was in 2008, actually, I think, or maybe 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a bit odd. So I wanted something to do for the summer. And so this was my sophomore year. And my advisor said, would occasionally send out these emails to everyone and say, why don't you, we're looking for interns or looking for interns. So this offer came out for interns. She encouraged me to apply, and it was an odd offer. Instead of an interview, they wanted you to write a implementation of some kind of, I think it was a Bayesian classifier, and send that in. So I spent the day kind of learning up on that, and then the next day wrote an implementation and sent it in.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess only one other person wrote an implementation, and so the two of us went in for interviews, and I got the position. It was full time over the summer, and it was for this guy that was a little bit of an odd position because I was actually hired by someone that was doing marketing, and he wanted me to just spend the whole summer working on classifiers, different types of classifiers. So Bayesian classifier, decision tree classifier, some other kind I don't quite remember. And he had this project laid out to create all these different classifiers and compare them on some different things. But the thing that was odd about it is that it didn't have anything to do with anything the company was doing. And I later learned that when I was done with the project, he left the company, he retired, and went into business for himself, trying to use classifiers to predict the stock market.
Okay, that's interesting. Did he succeed?
Um, Not wildly successful that I heard of. I think he was able to stay retired, but it was not a life of luxury by any means.
Okay. So fast forward to the next job, more like not the next job, but the change when you started working with C Sharp from Java. Based on your description, you sound like a guy who doesn't really care about the language, rather about the opportunities that arise and you adapt to the requirements.
Yeah, I'm not too much of a language purist, although there are languages suited for different types. I generally would not write C++ or some kind of systems level code unless I was writing something low level or performant or kind of a critical library.
Mm.
So in general, if I were going to start a project, I would start with something like Java or C Sharp or Python. I did Java for a long time. That's kind of where I learned most of what I think I know about software engineering. And then I ended up leaving the company I was working with. The project I was working on was kind of, it started a team of 50 people and it was down to 20 people and then it was down to 10 people. And then I think there were only like 6 or 7 people left and everyone kind of knew the project was on its way out. So I left and started working for a different company, and at the time, I thought the company I switched to they did everything in C#. And so I started my project with them in C#, kind of got up to speed on that after having done Java for a long time. And then I later learned that actually most of their code is written in C++, but they were happy to take my C# project.
Okay.
At least it wasn't Java, they said. That was the one thing. They had a lot of different languages there, but they really didn't like Java because they had some bad experiences with the JRE and trying to get it installed on different environments in the past.
So when you saw a job description with a language that you haven't worked with at the time, because I assume that you haven't touched much of C# when you applied to the position, or am I wrong?
I had done a little bit of C#. So that original internship back in like 2007,
Yeah.
I had done that all in C#. But now this was 2016, and I hadn't done any C# since then. But I knew the kind of the basics of the language. I knew it was like Java. I knew a few of the differences, but not a lot. And yeah, it was a little bit awkward because at the time I was really up to speed in Java. I knew all the different Java technologies and that kind of thing, and how to build a web server in Java. And then I took this position, which was as a senior position at this new company. And they said, okay, well, you're going to basically just run this project by yourself as a contractor for a while until you can get it up to speed, and then we'll build a team around it and see if we want to take it further. And so I came in kind of as a senior writing C#, and everyone sort of expecting me to turn out top level code. So I felt a little bit nervous. And I made a few embarrassing mistakes along the way, but I managed to muddle through. And probably in about 6 months, I think I had picked up enough of C# that I felt as competent as I used to be with Java on it.
Right. So you did, like, I bet in the requirements they said like at least 3 years of C# experience in work environment, and yet you still took the offer, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's become kind of a joke now when they write those things. So I put C# on my resume because I had done C# before. I would be willing to answer some questions on the basics of it, but in the interview, I was honest that it had been a while since I had done C#, but I wasn't too worried, and I felt I could pick up the language pretty quickly.
That's cool. That's really cool. That's a really good point in your working example, that it doesn't really matter as long as you are able to learn, and as long as you have a really good understanding of the overall concept of software engineering and the fundamentals. All right.
Yeah, I think a lot of the concepts, a lot of the patterns, just you build up over time, and so I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm learning things more slowly now that I'm getting older. But the first 5 years of just full-time writing code, I think I learned a lot.
Yep, definitely. Python, lastly, that's where you are now, what you're working with. Could you tell us about it?
Yeah. So what did I say? I had kind of a love-hate relationship with Python. And I actually did, when I was doing Java, all of our tests for that program that I was writing were written in Java. And so I helped out the QA team here and there and wrote a fair amount of Python, but wasn't actually writing a production application in Python, which I'm doing now. And, as the language goes, tends to be really concise and compact, but a lot less forgiving and a lot more prone to error, I feel. And certainly, it's odd because it's recommended as a starting language. But hold on one second.
It's okay. It's really funny, actually. The kind of environment that is similar to mine.
Yeah, sorry. There's chickens that kind of run around outside here.
It's okay. I also live in a rural area, so I am used to that.
No problem. All right. Yeah. So Python, the I, it's odd to me that it's kind of a beginning language and started with beginners, but with nothing very typed and nothing nothing strongly typed. There's not a lot of syntax checking. It's getting a little better with that now.
Yeah.
There's very little autocomplete. You have very little sort of errors while you're writing your code. So it feels like an odd language for a beginner to start with for me. But then if you know what you're doing, then it feels like you can go really quickly
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
you can sort of cheat when you want to cheat. And it reminds me a bit of TypeScript too in that way.
I'm very curious, how would you compare Java, C Sharp, and Python? And like, what would you say each is best suited at doing? Like, what problems would each language excel like at solving?
Yeah, I think Java and C Sharp are both kind of targeting the same area, which is really kind of these days it's a lot of microservice development
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of developing different applications to communicate with each other and building a solution and sort of um, something that can be well tested at different levels and can have a large team working on it. So, if you're going to have 5 to 10 people working on a large solution type project for a big company, that I think Java or C Sharp is just sort of the way to go. They have, there's enough large third party libraries out there. There's enough people that know the languages. There's
Yeah.
enough industry support, professional support if you need it. Um, and the languages kind of almost force you to write uh, sort of more descriptive code that's a little bit better to maintain. Um, Whereas Python, you could write some. I feel with Python you could end up with kind of a sloppier code base. Things could get there's less strict sort of naming conventions and guidelines. Do you have one class in Python file, or do you have 20 classes in a Python file? There's a lot of variation and things like that, and there's a wide range of expertises. So Python, there's a lot of people that use Python for writing just sort of analysis type scripts, scientific code. People are doing research and they're just writing scripts in Python. But it's pretty decent, I think, also for writing small applications or libraries that kind of stand on their own or solve a problem. Whereas I wouldn't necessarily use it to build a microservice framework or a website or something like that. What I'm using it for today is I needed a storage engine for storing data frames of data, large data frames, and Parquet is a file format for doing that, and PyArrow is a library for doing that. And PyArrow has really good Python bindings, and so that's kind of why I used Python at the start, was just because the library was there. But the application itself is a pretty self-contained storage application. You pass in data frames to the store, you pull them out. There's some querying and filtering and things like that.
Right.
But it's not a lot of dependencies. There's not a lot of, there's no complex. I'm not going to write an identity server or anything like that in Python.
So regarding a language for a beginner, you said that Python wouldn't be your go-to if you were a beginner because it's not very forgiving for mistakes.
Well, I can also see the advantages too, where it's you just write some quick script and you can run it. Um, Especially you don't have to worry about a compiler. Whereas
Mm.
Java, you have to have a fair amount of infrastructure kind of up and running just to get your first application, your hello
Yes.
world going. You have to have the JRE installed, the JDK installed. You have to have your IDE. Your IDE needs to be configured to know about your JRE and your JDK. C Sharp is probably, I would say, easier than Java to just really get started and get off the ground, because you just
Yeah.
use Visual Studio, you write something, you say run. And then Python's probably even easier to really get started writing scripts. But then once you want to go beyond scripts, you want to start doing more like object-oriented programming or things like those lines, then Python's going to start. There's going to be fewer examples. In fact, it was kind of a fun thing for this Python project. I decided purposely to not do normally when I write something, I've got a lot of objects and dependency injection and this big kind of floating ecosystem. Whereas this Python project I'm working on, everything's mostly global. I have pretty few objects. It's written very procedurally, which a lot of the kind of large Python projects are written that way. And so it can work again for a small application for something that's not really going to grow and need to be supported by a large team. But so if you're getting started, I think beyond writing scripts, you're going to start running into headaches with Python.
Right, but you are not making a small thing, if I understand correctly. So I was wondering why, like, if you were to start doing the same thing that you're doing now in your current job from scratch, would you still choose Python over, say, C Sharp?
I think both of them could be suitable. If I were to start over, I would probably still stick with Python. I don't think, I don't know. It would depend, I think, on what mood I'm in for the day. I mean, I think both languages would be good. And it's not, I mean, when I say large, I'm thinking more of multiple services and applications communicating with each other.
Yeah.
This is less than 10,000 lines of code, and just has a HTTP API, has maybe 20 methods that I have to support.
Yeah.
And then that's about it.
All right. Fair enough. So was it back to your first job, but after beyond internship, was it difficult finding a job as a young programmer at the time? Were you rejected many times?
I was very lucky, actually. And so I will freely admit that too, that it wasn't necessarily skill, but just luck. So I did that one internship, and then I did another internship the following year. And so the following year, it was like 2008, I think, and it was kind of, the market was booming when I got my second internship. And then after I finished that second internship, the market crashed, and then I graduated. So when I graduated, it was in 2009, although I stayed to do my master's to 2010, but I was looking for work in 2009. And so that was right after the stock market crash and the economy kind of tanked and a lot of people were out of work. But I had done that internship the year before, and it just so happens that they needed one more person to kind of work on this project. Now, they had frozen all internal hiring, but the hiring manager that had hired me for the last year for my internship had apparently not processed my termination paperwork correctly. So instead of being actually fired, I was just switched to 0 hours and wasn't paid. But I was still technically in their HR system as an employee. So for whatever reason, it meant that they could hire me or really just raise my hours back up to full time.
Okay.
So I kind of lucked out there, and then that project managed to last for a few years and get stable, and then the market was doing well. So I've had probably 5 or 6 interviews or jobs that I've applied for and gone to the interview level and then didn't get accepted for. But I've been lucky to not have a ton of rejection.
All right. That's cool. Do you have any personal projects or any noticeable projects that you ever worked on, like by yourself, beyond work?
Yeah, so I think the last I checked, I forget the exact number, but it's something like 55 projects on GitHub that I've started. and then abandoned. Um, so I always have some personal project that I want to do, and um, there's always something I'm working on that's not work, and I've never found the ability to keep a project going.
Yeah.
For a long time, I just wanted to make like that Hearts project. That's probably like the fourth or fifth time I've tried to just make like a networked card game of Hearts, and each time I kind of learned something new and interesting, and then I kind of have a sense of how I write the rest of the application, and then I get distracted by something else.
Yeah, yeah. I also remember when I was preparing for lessons, I would kind of get hyped making something cool, and then um I would give that code that's half complete to students and say that their homework is to finish it and make it work. So it's
Yeah, and yeah, this comic that Star Walker just posted, I've seen before. It's a little too close to home.
yeah. Um anyways, you
But
mentioned go on, sorry. Go on if you had.
I was just going to say, yeah, professionally, the nice thing about working on a team is that when you get into that mode where it's kind of like, oh, I don't feel that passionate about finishing this particular component or whatever, then yeah, you can find someone else to work on that.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Um anyways, that's a very good thing. How do you get do you ever feel like you really don't want to do what you're doing at work when it finds really redundant? Like your projects, there is a point when you're like, I don't feel like doing it anymore. Like there are cooler things. Is being paid a motivation big enough to have you up and running 100%?
Um, it's enough of a motivation for me to show up every day and work, but those hours are not going to be the same just because I'm paid. So yeah, definitely there's cycles when I'm working on projects. There'll be a period of time where I'm really sort of enthusiastic about
Yeah.
something. I'm really trying to figure something out. I'm curious to see what kind of performance results it's going to get. There's a lot of unknown there, and I'll write a lot of code really quickly. And there's phases where it's a lot of QA and tying up loose ends and perfecting things, and I don't have as much enthusiasm, but I still kind of churn away at it, and I'm not as productive for those periods of time. Um, yeah, that's a chicken in the background. It's laying an egg, so
Yes.
it'll finish here sooner or later.
All right.
But I think I've just kind of come to accept that. Now, there was a period of like 2 years where I had a good friend that was on my team, and they did not like, for whatever reason, they did not really like the big unknown open questions. They felt like they didn't have enough details, and they didn't like trying to architect or figure that kind of thing out. But they would really appreciate if I would just assign as many of the kind of detail based oriented stories to them as I could. And so I would do that, and that worked out really well for like 2 years. We got a lot of code written because I would tackle something until it came down to the details, and then I would assign all the details to him, and he would work on those while I kind of tackled the next big thing. But I think that kind of personality is pretty rare.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So regarding learning, you said 5 years, like your first 5 years were the pinnacle of your learning, and now it's kind of slowing down. But do you have a special way of learning, something that over the years you find efficient to learn?
Yeah, I mean the best way I found I'm not the type I can grab a book and I can just sit down and read through it and be terribly interested in it, especially a book about programming. Um, so I have a lot more success learning by doing. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing with my personal projects is I always try to, with my personal projects, have something in there I'm learning that I haven't worked with before. Like right now, I'm working on a personal project where I'm trying to do a lot of what's the where it's gosh, delayed consistency or eventual consistency. That's the term. Eventual consistency, where you can't really trust everything to be accurate all the time, and working with
Hmm.
like a NATS messaging service
Yeah.
and passing a lot of messages back and forth and having different views of data. So I'm trying that out with my personal project. But that's, I mean, the way I learn is by personal projects, taking on new technologies, new ideas, and just trying to solve them. I don't think I can learn even by reading a book or watching a video. I don't learn that well, but if I run into the problem and then use a tool to solve it, then I can learn it pretty well.
Yeah, fair enough. I also consider that as the best way to learn, but I like mixing it with different methods. Now, the part everyone has been waiting for, the scariest part for you too. Your fuck ups part. Have you had any major fuck ups in your career? And we would really like to hear them.
Oh, sure. I mean, nothing too catastrophic. I remember one of my very first internship interviews. I was actually um, I think I was in high school at the time, and I was looking for an internship between high school and college. In high school, now I realize one of my earlier answers was a lie. I said I never did any programming, which is technically true. But I took a CCNA course that was offered through the school in networking. Um, is a lot more of like physical networking, hooking the wires up, programming the routers, and that kind of thing. So I tried to use that knowledge to get an internship, and I got an interview with Micron, and I went there, and I don't know if this answer was that terrible after the fact, but I felt really stupid for my answer. They asked, "What's your greatest?" I think it was, "What is your greatest weakness?" And I
Right.
think my answer was that I make really rash decisions, but generally they turn out okay. And uh, and so I didn't get that position, but that wasn't too big of a screw up. I mean, and then in work, um, there's one, and this is not a programming mess up, but I was leading a team. There were like 3 or 4 teams that were part of a larger kind of solution level team, and um, so there was some kind of question about how to do something, and the person that was in charge of all the teams wanted to do it one way, and I wanted to do it a different way, and I was just kind of harassing the guy about, oh, my way's better, and how can you solve this problem, and your way's going to fall apart here, and this doesn't work, and so I didn't realize it, but I think I was just like really going after the guy throughout the whole week. And I guess he had a lot of other stresses and business wasn't doing that good. And so then he really just like snapped at me during a meeting once and just kind of like laid into me and said, you got to just work with the teams and you're being really annoying and you just blah, 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 blah. And then he ended up getting in trouble for that. And everyone went my way. But I felt really like I should have been the one to get in trouble because I think he was right. I was not enough of a team player. I was too stubborn and it has to be my way. And I don't ever do enough listening, I realized. And so after that, like before when I was in meetings, I was always trying to be heard. And then after that, when I was in meetings, I tried to really intentionally do a lot of listening, a lot better job of kind of if it's not critical, let's go with the other person's idea and let's try and be more player. Um, but that moment sticks with me for whatever reason.
I think it's a really good lesson for everyone to listen to what others have to say and don't be too pushy about your ideas and sacrifice your opinion at some points for the sake of the good of the team. It's really great that you said this story because I think it should happen way more, and way too many people don't realize this or realize it too late.
Yeah, and something about, I mean, the profession, you definitely can draw in zealots. Um, there's a certain benefit to that, and it's good to have a healthy amount of strong opinions on a team.
But then, eventually things need to work together too. And I also remember once we were hiring for a company, and we were trying to pick someone to hire, and we had maybe 5 or 6 different people, and none of them were really like 5-star superstar candidates, but there's a lot of fairly solid candidates. And my boss told me, he's like, "Oh, this is really good. It's not a problem at all. Everyone, when they go into hiring, they think, oh, I have to hire the next, best top developer at the company. But, a team doesn't work if you fill the entire team with superstars. It's good to have a lot of just sort of solid people that can follow along and get work done too." And he says that he tends to even try and make sure that those people get paid appropriately compared to the superstars that are more flashy and showy, and make a big fuss about which way to build things and design things at the company. Now, as far as sort of messing up in code, so this is back one more story. Then when I took that CCNA networking certification. It was through like a vocational education class. So we got on a bus with a bunch of people that were learning like electrical skills and auto repair skills. And we would like computer networking. I think it was intended for not going to college, take your computer networking skills, and get a trade job as a CCNA or CCNA program routers. And so they had their special competition once a year. And so there was a competition at the school. You had to do the best at your school, and then you would get to go to the national competition where you would compete with the rest of the country. And so I did the best at my school, so I got to go on the national competitions. That was really exciting. And there were 3 different components. One, you had to kind of build a network cable and just terminate it really well. One was a written test. And then the most interesting one was kind of, you had to program a router, a Cisco router. And so I did really cool. I go there, and now I'm at this national competition, and I feel like there's a lot of pressure because, there were some other people in my school that were pretty good too. And, they didn't get to go, so I've got to represent. And so I'm here programming this router, and I think I've got it pretty solid, actually. I've kind of figured this all out. I remembered all the commands. I remembered everything I need to do. And I get it all programmed. And then one of the last steps you do, and I'm going to have to struggle a little on the details here, but you want to copy your, you kind of have to boot the router into privilege mode. I think this was like a recovery thing. And so you boot it into this mode where the runtime configuration is completely blank. That way there's no authorization or anything like that. And then you load in the saved configuration, and now you kind of load the saved configuration into runtime, and that's just how you bypass not knowing the password. But I reversed the command. So I wrote the blank configuration over the saved configuration. So in like a theoretical, if this was a real company, I just destroyed all of the data that they were trying to recover. And I got a 0 on that portion of the competition, and I think I got last place in the competition.
Oh.
And it's just really embarrassing because, I just reversed the command and completely obliterated the router. And they were even complaining to me afterwards because they had to do a lot of work to get it back into the right state for the next competitors.
Oh boy, but back then you were really young, weren't you?
Yeah, that was my senior year of high school. So
yeah.
Professionally, I've made a lot of kind of retrospective, look back and say, if I had redone this, I could have done it a lot better. I would have done it a lot differently. But not too many cases where it was obviously wrong. And like right now, I'm working on this thing, and I feel like I've rewritten it 3 different times. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Now about your personal achievements, or more like revelations, like your programming breakthroughs, like things that really you consider being a milestone in your programming understanding or career, I'm not sure, but something that basically changed the way you think or made you much better, like some aha moment, a realization. Do you have any of those that you still remember to this day?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a few. So when I was in college learning to program, and it was sort of near my senior year. One second, let me turn off this fan.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, there was a. It was either my senior year or my junior year, and I'd been running code for a while, and then I was working on some new personal projects or something like that, and realized that I had reached a point where it was, I could anything I wanted to develop, that was like a practical project that could be developed, I could get it done. Like if I needed to build some system to do XYZ, I could figure it out and I could solve it, I felt. And it would really just be a matter of time, how long it would take, whether I'd have the motivation to figure it out. But it kind of felt like I understand this programming thing enough that you can give me a project and I feel really confident that I could figure it out and write an application. Now, it might not be the best, but it would get the job done. And then later, when I was working full time, um, I started to do a lot of work. When I first started working full time, I really didn't understand kind of architecture, how things were pieced together. Um, there were a lot of decisions that were made in the application, and I didn't understand them, and I wasn't sure if that meant they were good decisions or bad decisions, or and I took on kind of smaller, more targeted tasks as a junior, and um, then I think what really helped me kind of get past that. This was right around the time when um, Spring was coming out for Java,
Mm-hmm.
and dependency injection was starting to really become popular. Um, which I guess for people that are starting now, it's a weird thing to think that it didn't always exist, but there was a time when it sort of sometime around 2000-ish, maybe a little after that, between 2000 and 2010 probably, um, when dependency injection started to become more mainstream and used everywhere. And so I started working on Spring, which was bringing dependency injection to Java. Now it was really kind of a pain the way you had to do it. You had to write these XML files and
Yeah.
specify little class names and things like that. But it got me into this mentality of, okay, everything is is beans in Spring, but everything is a dependency component that gets managed by my dependency injection container. And then I probably went overboard where I was making really everything was managed by the dependency injection container, and I had to step back a little bit there. But that really helped me when I understood dependency injection and understood this framework, get into the idea of, okay, this class is kind of this self-contained module. Here's the problem it's solving. Here's where it fits into the application lifecycle. And I can design this, I can take this other class and I can break it up into two IC because it's doing too much. And so once I started having to really apply dependency injection everywhere, it forced me to start breaking things up and piecing things together in more meaningful and useful ways. And I kind of really had this aha moment of just, okay, I can understand now if I need to solve a big problem, how should I break it up into smaller classes and what all those classes should be and what jobs they should try and solve and that sort of thing.
Right.
And so I feel like that was kind of an aha architecture moment, that that task really of doing a lot of things moving into Spring, really understanding that when I came out of finishing that, I felt like I had a solid grasp really of architecture. And that previous aha was, okay, I kind of have a solid grasp of just writing code and getting things done.
Right. So how many years was that from your internship to having a grasp on dependency inversion injection?
Yeah, so that was probably around 2012, 2013. So it was probably about 5 years after.
Okay,
I
fair
did.
enough. Go on, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, and by this point, I had been just kind of the luck of the way my career went. I had been a senior developer for already like 2 years. So I'm not saying you have to have everything figured out to become a senior developer necessarily. Yeah, so when I first started full time, I joined this team, and it was one team amongst there were 4 teams on this larger project, and so I was just a member of this one team, but it was the only team that was located in the site that I was in, and they decided to close that site and relocate that site to a different city. And I was the only one at the time who was kind of young and didn't have any kids or any real roots or anything like that. So I was the only one in the team that was able to move down. So then they just made me the head of the team because I was the only one that moved. So there was no one else left. And then they hired new people to work on the team under me. And
Mm-hmm.
so going from junior to senior developer, again, I was just all luck really for me.
You
And a
didn't
little bit of
have mid position in between?
not really. I mean, I don't know. And for the different companies I've worked for, there's never been a solid junior senior position or something like that. Usually their positions are like the one I'm in now, they just have developer 1 through developer 7 or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And it's not like 1, 2, and 3 are junior and 4, 5, 6, and 7 are senior. It's just so I don't know. I think I just went from like a 2 to a 5 or something. No, probably 2 to a 4 as part of the move, and then I was in charge of a team. So
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't really any. But it was also, I mean, timing wise, when I graduated, it was kind of a weird time. They said because um, what happened was when I graduated, Google and Facebook and all those companies had kind of just become really cool and popular, and everyone wanted to work for them. Um, so my bosses at the time, like everyone that I was working, I was 20, and everyone that I was working with was 35, 40, or older. And they just said that they've had a really hard time hiring people for the last decade because there was like a decade there where computer science was just not cool for a while again. Um, and then also anyone that really did go into computer science was flocking to California to get involved in some big startup or something like that. So yeah, it was also a really nice time to get started because then there's not a lot of people in between, so you can kind of jump up pretty quickly once those 35 and 40-year-olds start retiring or disappearing or whatever.
Right. How did you feel making that big switch from junior-ish to leading a team?
Yeah, so I felt really, as I think I said earlier, when I went from Java to C Sharp, which
Mm-hmm.
is not this switch, I felt kind of nervous and a little bit worried and things like that. Now, when I went from junior to senior and being a part of this team to leading this team, I was a lot younger and more stupid and full of myself. And so I just felt really confident. Like this was no problem. I mean, looking back, I could have done things a lot better and I wasted a lot of time and, I was very inefficient and I should not have been nearly so confident, but I had a lot of confidence coming out of college, and
Yeah,
it also helped to carry me far in my career.
yeah. What would be some of the examples of your inefficiency? Like what stuck to you as being a fresh team lead?
I think so. We had it was, and this is one of the things I struggle with even today, trying to figure out the right balance for QA. But our project was we were trying to get a new product to market, and we were following the same policies that get followed with old projects. We had really strict quality criteria. and a really waterfall-based development pipeline. And so we would kind of once a year go through this long planning phase. And then we would come up with all these features we would need. And we had a really good QA team in the sense that they were really able to define a ton of tests. And we spent a lot of time on testing and a lot of time on kind of defects. And we would build. So we were building my team was building a web server, and we had built this web server that, we felt really confident you could have 50 people using the web server at the same time, doing the same kinds of operations, and we hammered it really hard, and it could support really high scales and things like that. And we spent all this time building this thing, and we couldn't sell it because we were building it. We weren't ready to release yet. We weren't ready to release yet. So by the time we were ready to release, we'd already had like 2 or 3 years of development on this project and a ton of money that was spent. And so it was just, then they wanted to find a customer right away that was a huge customer that was willing to justify all that investment that had been made. And it never really happened. And I think if you're starting a new project as a company, you really have to start small, targeted projects, and don't try to build a giant system that can run with 50 concurrent users and all that kinds of things. Just get something that's a real proof of concept out there, get it sold, get some companies interested in it. And even if the quality is not 100%, it's never going to crash or have a flaw or anything like that. Even if you have a few bugs and flaws in there, customers tend to be a lot more forgiving of software than the engineers that develop them. I read that somewhere. I think there's some science behind it. I like to believe it. And so I think probably the biggest mistake we made was just that we spent way too much time and energy building something when we could have built something much smaller, more targeted, got some interest, and then chased exactly what the customer wanted.
Right. So what would you do different today if you did that again, if you had to do the project from day one?
I would have fought for, one, releasing a lot earlier when it couldn't do as much, and two, not as strict on the performance scale and quality metrics. So I think if you can push something out there that it can, and I think, this is all kind of like waterfall versus agile and that sort of thing too, but just not, I was really passionate about making sure that everything was 100% testable, 100% unit tested.
Yeah.
Really passionate about having that traceability from product test and functional test and solution testing. A lot of that stuff is really good. So I'm not arguing against that, but I think you have to balance it. And I think I spent way too much on the testing side. Whereas the project I'm working on now, the quality is good, but it's not great. I could probably crash the thing if I wanted to. And I know there's a few places in there where I could do things better. And there's a lot of features that are sort of like teaser features where I've implemented enough of the feature that you can kind of see what it would do, but it's not completely 100% implemented. And I just throw that out there all the time. And it's where we started with versus where we're at now. I think I've rewritten and completely re-understood the requirements and what problem I'm trying to solve at least 3 times by now. And so the quality's never had a chance to get to that super great polished state, but I don't think you should get there until you really are certain that you have something that's solid, needed, and people are willing to pay for.
Yeah, definitely. I like saying that we're not getting paid for delivering perfect code. We're getting paid for delivering good enough code for the client.
Yeah, exactly. And then I also, I think another thing I like saying is that if you don't feel like you're hanging on by a shoestring and like you're starving for resources and you're just barely getting things done, and then you're you're not doing it right. I mean, if you feel like it's really comfortable, I designed this thing, I sat down for 3 months and I built it, and it's really solid and 100% perfect, and I wouldn't want to re-architect it and things like that, then you're doing it wrong.
That's really interesting. First time I heard that. Could you expand on this point? Because I would like to know more.
Uh, and maybe this is not a good thing for me to be saying, but really just if, and I think if I were to summarize it in one line, I think I said once something like, if you don't feel like you're starving in your project, then you're not doing it right. But the idea is just that if you're too comfortable, then you're too confident that you understand your requirements, or you're spending too much time getting everything right, and you're not going to be moving quickly enough and adapting to the changing needs. Because, and I think it probably changes depending on the life cycle of your project. All the projects I've worked in, well, not all of them, most of the projects I've worked on have been in that starting new project phase, trying to get customers really interested in it. Once you land a few really big deals and you have solid customers and you're maintaining something, I think the mentality can probably change. But when you're in that new project mentality, I think you really have to be um, feeling like you just scraped enough together for the next customer demo, and then they give you some new thing that they want you to work on, and you just scrape enough together for that one. And you shouldn't. It's kind of the Yagni principle, where if you're doing so much that it's solid and comfortable, then you're doing too much.
Okay. I just wrote the quote. Just let me know if I got it right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a.
I really want to solidify it and put it in text because it's a really good one, I think.
Yeah,
especially
I
since
think that's right.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. All right, last part is the advice part. So first, what advice would you give to someone who is just getting into programming?
Yeah, I think when you're just starting, especially when you're just I mean, when you're just starting at university or whatever, then my advice is to listen and take the advice that's given to you, and get people to work with and find help. One of the most useful things for me in college was that I had, well, actually, so I had a rival, and that was the best thing. So if you can get yourself a rival, that's always really good. We were friendly, but we took all of the same classes together, and we were really good friends. And our goal was really to always one up the other one. Yeah, like a rival, a nemesis. But yes, I mean, when it came to the actual project, we were determined to beat each other, and then we would go. Yeah, sorry, yeah, not a rifle. We would and so that I would not have learned nearly as much if I were just trying to pass the class as if I were trying to beat this person and get a better score than them.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how you find one, but and also just having that community, a group of friends that you work with and you can study with and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like why I like this Discord. So when you're just learning, that would be my advice. When you're starting your job, my advice would be to be bold and confident and just try new things. And we used to have, I used to work hiring interns, and they would always come in. And one of the things I would explain to them, which was technically, I think, true for this company I worked with at the time, is that there's more work to fire an intern than it is to let them finish out their summer internship and just give them a bad review. Because if you fire them, you have to go through all this paperwork and HR, and then you have to, make sure you cover all your bases so that they're not going to say that you're firing them improperly. At least here in the U.S., it's not super easy to fire someone. You have to kind of give good cause and show that you gave them chances and that kind of thing. And so you tell them, don't be afraid of messing up. You're not going to get fired because it's cheaper for the company to just pay you for the rest of the summer than it is for us to fire you. So you could literally just sit there and play games all day and we wouldn't fire you. Now, don't do that. But, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Don't be afraid of asking questions. Don't be afraid of bothering the people that you're working with, and being a nuisance as much as you can. Because then that's how you're going to learn and get new things and that sort of thing. And then, once things get going, and you're on your way developing, then I think my advice would be, there's the obvious kind of, you have to always keep learning. Everything is always changing. You can't let yourself get stagnant, and just always be kind of passionate. And now, I mean, it sort of depends. There's always people in the workplace that are going to fall into two categories. You're going to have the people that are passionate about the craft and they want to get better and perfect it and that kind of thing. And then you're going to have the people where it's just, it's a job, but their passion in life is their church, or it's going on hikes, or it's something like that. It's their family, and the job is just, they go to it and they want to get it done. And that's fine too. But understand where you are, and those people are fine, and they're going to have a important, every company needs lots of those people because they get the job done and they don't rock the boat as much. But if you want to be the leader, you want to be at the top or whatever, you got to always be learning and always be challenging yourself and trying new things and not becoming complacent.
That's a very good advice. Regarding rivalry, I think you are like, the way I imagine you, you're like probably at the top, like in your company in terms of development, engineering. And do you have a rival or someone who is very good and you have to, get their shit together to catch up, or not to let the number one position?
Yes, and I wouldn't say I'm necessarily at the top of my company, because there's a lot of different, at least the company I work with, pretty large companies. There's a lot of different areas that you can develop on. I think I'm one of the top when it comes to kind of like server development and web development. Now, we have some people at our company that are really good at C++ and hardware development and firmware, and I wouldn't be able to compete with them. But yeah, there's certainly enough people at the company that I never get to the point where I feel too confident in my position. So yeah, I mean, and in fact, I would say that, imposter syndrome never goes away. I always do worry that, I'm going to go to the company and they're going to realize, oh, this Weston guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. And all this stuff he's doing is not necessarily, he's just kind of making stuff up as he goes along. And there's a certain truth to that. But fortunately, there's enough people at my company with enough smarts that I do not feel like I'm just sitting at the top. And I'm always kind of a little bit worried about falling behind or not keeping up. Especially, now there's a lot of knowledge being built around kind of microservices and development there. And I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of it, so that helps. And I think that's even going to be changing soon here. The companies I've worked with have always done a lot of had to balance. Their customers don't really like putting their stuff onto AWS or the cloud or something along those lines, because they don't want to put their data in the cloud. They're kind of paranoid about it. But if you don't do that, then you can't take advantage of kind of all the AWS services. And so, a lot of the work we do, sometimes it feels like we're doing stuff that maybe AWS would do better. And so even not just within the company, but it feels like other companies are always going to be competing with you, and they're always going to have different ways of doing things. I would say even if you're the top of your company, you're still going to be competing, because there's going to be other companies going to be looking for that business as well.
Right. So you think that rivalry is very important to learning or being motivated to learn, no matter what experience you have so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a strong, no matter how much experience you have, it's a strong motivation for learning and improving. Is so if you were the type of, if you're going to be like a project manager or people manager, make sure always have um, some healthy competition going on within your company because it's going to drive people to innovate and try new things.
Yeah, right. And what do you do when you get stuck, or rather, what would you advise to people who get stuck? Like, what should they do to unstuck?
Yeah, that's so that's one thing I noticed kind of when I working professionally and I was starting to get to the point where I really kind of understand things. The more and more I learned, the more and more it felt like I would fall into the trap of analysis paralysis, of you know
Mm.
trying to think so much about the problem that I wasn't actually getting anything done or any code written. Um, and then it got to the point where I would look at it and I would say, if I when I was in college, I wrote um, some kind of application to draw Fibonacci images, um,
Mm-hmm.
and it took like a week. And part of that was just that you're in college, you have all this time to work on your personal projects and things like that. But it's like I've learned so much, but now if I were to tackle that project, the end result would be higher quality, but it would take me a lot more than a week because I would sit down and I would design something and I would think about, okay, well, what's the actual application going to look like? Am I going to need to save these things to the disk? Um, and what technologies am I going to use? And I got to make sure I have to get all of my dependency injection set up, and I have to get all of my kind of application lifecycle, and I probably want to make some kind of HTTP API, and then hook it into some kind of web technology to do the actual UI for it. And so I'm going to have to get a continuous integration going and a build system going, and so on and so on and so on. Whereas, in college, it was a really crappy Swing application and I just started writing code and I kept writing code until I had something that worked. And so you've got to connect with that um, inner just hacker, get stuff done, start writing code person somehow. And so I still struggle with that. And that, I think that comes back to with the, you want to always be starving a little bit. You want to always not quite be sure what your final design is going to be. And that's, I mean, one of the things I like about test-driven development, um, even though I probably don't practice it as religiously, but the ideas I take away from it are start small, write something, refactor, go forward, write something new, refactor, write something new, refactor. Is you're not going to come up with a good design just sitting there. Now, the
Yeah.
more the more you're going to start a project. You probably have this design sitting in your head, and I think that can actually kind of work against you too, where it prevents you from, if I were to start a new project, like I wanted to write, some kind of whatever, any application, um, I'll sit down and instantly I'll be able to just connect it to all the projects I've worked on in the past. And I'm going to say, I'm going to need one of these and one of these and one of those and one of those, and I'll get connected in this way. And I think that works against you. I think, you want to start a new project, there's a certain amount of healthy forward thinking you can do, but also you're probably going to be more beneficial to just start small, get something there, refactor, write something new, refactor, write something new, refactor, write something new.
Yeah, it has a really good name for it. It's called duct taping, and like literally the most silly idea ever. Not silly, but it's so silly that it's brilliant that you just go, like if even if you are clueless, you just Google up code from Stack Overflow, paste that into your code base. You then run it through your tests, and then you refactor it. You run it again, you refactor it again, and continue from that. Just you don't need to think, just make it work, make it do what is needed and nothing more. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like that name. And I think that's a skill that is lost the more you know. So you have to consciously
Yeah.
make an effort as you advance in your career to keep doing that and not fall into the getting stuck route. I mean, and then as far as getting stuck, oh, I'm writing some code
and I don't know how to structure its algorithm or something like that. That doesn't happen too much. I mean, it's usually like, oh, I've hit this point. I know I could solve it this way, or I could solve it that way. Both of those solutions sound like a lot of work. I really don't feel like doing a lot of work today. Maybe I'll go work on some other feature instead. And I don't have good advice on how you get past that yet. I still struggle with that.
So you don't think there is any great way other than just letting it sort itself out, kind of like, digest the idea and let it come naturally eventually? I mean, I'm talking about not when you have options, but when you are actually out of options and you don't even know how to approach a problem. There is a problem, but you don't know how to approach it.
Yeah, and I mean, it might just be the type of applications I work on where that doesn't happen as, I mean, I don't know. For whatever reason, I don't think I end up in that state all that often. I mean, sometimes I do, I guess, design wise, where I'll run into a problem and I'll say, you know what, there's a better way of solving this. I don't know what it is, but this feels very hacky. I feel like I've had to repeat myself a few times. There's something that's missing in my design, and I don't know what it is yet. Um, and then I just power through. It's like, okay, well, I'll extend the hack until I understand it. And so I like in my current project that I'm working on, um, we have two kinds of data sets. And one is the normal kind, and that's like 90% of the code. And then the other one is sort of a special kind, and there's a lot of restrictions on how you can use it and what you can do with it. And the way it's implemented is pretty clumsy. I have a lot of checks to see, is this a special kind of data set? Okay, if it is, then do something different. So there's, kind of the number of ifs, or like the cyclomatic complexity of the entire application is increased by like 1.5 just for this one really small feature. And so I know there's a better solution there. I think it probably has something to do with, changing the data set object that exists throughout my entire application and adding, some capabilities as booleans or something along that. So at least it looks a little bit cleaner than what it is right now. Like instead of saying, is this a special data set? If so, do this. It'd be, is this a readable data set? Is this a writable data set? But I don't know exactly what that would look like. And that's where the ability to just power through and, if you have a hack, just keep hacking it until you understand it. So I'd say if you get stuck, just look at what the next piece you can solve is and keep plugging away at it until you can solve it.
Right. Okay. And what about yourself? Do you remember something that stuck to your head? An advice that someone gave you that you remember to this day that you value a lot?
I think I've mentioned a few of them. Kind of it's a be bold. That wasn't mine. I actually stole that from Wikipedia. Which that first internship writing classifiers, I finished really quickly, and so I had to write a lot of. My boss came by and I said, "Oh, I finished all these different classifiers. What do you want me to do next?" He's like, "I don't have anything for you to do, but make yourself useful. Just edit Wikipedia pages or something like that if you're bored, or learn something." And so I did like a month of editing Wikipedia pages. There's the be bold as part of their guidelines there, so the fundamental principle. So that was important advice. The you can't have a team of superstars is important advice for kind of team building and how do you create a good team for writing code. And then I think I a lot of people have given me advice over the years, but I don't know that it was ever really distilled down into sound bites so much. I've had people I've worked with that I've been really inspired by. Like I used to know this one person, and she could write code. Like she had mastered the non staying in that productive state of
where I was kind of saying, when I get to the details, I kind of slow down. But if it's something I'm really interested in, I can write a lot of code really fast. She was always in that state. She was always writing code super fast and would never get bogged down, whether she was doing the details or the code itself. And so, it was very inspiring. And I tried to figure out how she could do it, but I never really did. Um, and I've had, a number of people give me advice on kind of how do you run a team and leadership and what to look for. And, I've worked with some great QA testers who taught me a lot about, how do you test your code honestly and make sure you don't cheat yourself, and how do you achieve good quality, and, if you want high standards, what are those high standards and how do you reach for them? Um, but yeah, I've had a lot of advice given to me over the years, but I don't know that I have any good sound bites that I can
It's
pinpoint
okay.
specifically.
It's okay. The flow part was interesting, as especially recently I find my work a bit boring and I find it really hard getting into that state. But for me personally, when deadlines are reaching, looming, and getting close, when I'm under pressure, I'm often getting into the flow really easily. What about you? What would you say is the requirement for flow for you?
Yeah, I would agree with that, where it gets to a certain point where, okay, I'm going to have to be productive this next 2 weeks, or this project's not going to get done.
Yeah.
And then I can manage to do it. And probably the most, it's the thing about this whole pandemic that's hurt the most is the best way I have for getting in the flow is really just removing all distractions. So, at work, when I was working with a team and there were a lot of people that I would talk with, I would go somewhere else to work where people couldn't find me. And then now I'm kind of full time remote, but yeah, I work at home and there's all these distractions here. So if I really am working on something boring and I need to get in the flow, then, I leave my phone at home and I go to the library, and there's, nothing to distract me there. And so I can just focus and work more. And so just finding that place where everything else around you is equally boring, then I can
Yes.
manage to get in the flow and get work done.
Yes, remove all the temptations. So that work is the most fun thing that we're left with.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Lastly, you might be aware that I'm learning Java at the moment. So would you consider learning Java as a C# person a downgrade? And also, regardless of that, what would you recommend as someone who knows one language very well, learning another language? Like, how would you approach that learning?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really view it as a downgrade. Anytime you're learning a new language, I try and just think about always in the back of your head, what are the things that this language does better? What are the things that it doesn't do as well? And also try and, you know, there's the community is always going to have a different feel for its examples and a different way that they write code. Like when I was saying with Python, everyone is writing code that's global and procedural, and you can learn a lot from that. So I would say embrace the community of the language that you're working in. Don't try to write C# style code in Java, but as you look for Java examples and you say, that's a little different, I wouldn't necessarily have done things that way, embrace it and do it the Java way, or the way of the language that you're learning. Kind of between C# and Java, the biggest sort of fuzzy difference I noticed between the two communities was that the Java community really, at the time, seemed to have a much bigger embracing of the open source model of, with Java, there's a lot of third-party libraries out there that you have to understand and learn to solve a problem, and you're not going to get, there's no Microsoft when it comes to Java, so you're not going to get a one authoritative source that's telling you about that. So if you want to learn, Entity Framework or whatever is Hibernate, what's the acronym for it? But with the storage, the JPA persistence type stuff, you're not going to learn it from Sun or Oracle. You're going to have to go and learn it from the libraries and the companies that write it. Whereas with C Sharp, it's, there is the Microsoft way for doing everything. If you want to build a full service microservice application, they have a book and an example, and they've broken down every single step of the way and the problem. And so it's very interesting in different ways. So like when I first started writing C Sharp, I remember I was always looking for library documentation for the library provider itself. And it's just, no, everything's on MSDN. You don't use third-party libraries. It's all Microsoft. And sometimes you might have to use a third-party library here or there, but it's for a specialized field of knowledge and not for just writing an actual application. Whereas Java, you're going to have to learn a number of third-party libraries that are not Sun or Oracle sponsored just to get it done. And you have to get a lot more sort of community involvement and merging together different things. And so there's a really big kind of different feel for it there. I would say one thing I did a lot in Java that I don't do a lot in C Sharp is setting breakpoints in my code and then stepping into third-party code. I stepped into Hibernate a lot while I was working on Hibernate, so I could get a better understanding of what Hibernate is doing. In C Sharp, I still have not today figured out how to actually do that. If I try to step into C Sharp code, it doesn't ever find the sources, and I'm sure there's some way I can get it all configured.
Decompiler. You need decompiler. ReSharper does that, for example, out of the box.
But I mean, ReSharper will give me some, but it wasn't giving me like the source code at the same level that I would get with Java. Now, anyway, you shouldn't do that for whatever reason in C Sharp. I found that I didn't need to do that. You just trust either that MSDN is going to have some good solid documentation. You don't have to figure it out yourself. Whereas I feel like with Java, the best way to learn a library is to start digging into the library yourself, stepping through it as you're using it. And learning it that way, because you can't rely on every library that you're using to have fantastic documentation.
Yeah, I was really annoyed in Java when I was getting my hands dirty with logging. Like so you have a logger, and you don't just create a logger. You have a logger manager that gets your logger. Then from there, you think, so I have a logger, I can do logging now. No, you cannot do a logger now. You need to have logger appender added to the logger, but you think logger appender would be enough. No. It needs to have a pattern, and you would think pattern is a string, but no, it's an object. It's an abstract class that you need to implement. Like, you go down the rabbit hole, but then you realize they're like static helper methods that kind of abstract that away, but it's like mixed with everything else, and you're hella confused.
Yeah, and all of those options and pieces and parts of the logging library exist in C Sharp as well. But one, the default is probably what you want.
Exactly.
And two, if it isn't, there's a lot of extension methods that probably just give you, okay, here's mode 2 and mode 3. And these are the Microsoft 3 ways of doing logging. And why on earth would you do it any other way?
Yes.
Whereas in Java, it's like, this is what logging is, and you need to embrace it and understand all of the pieces.
Yeah.
And develop your own philosophy about what's the best way of doing logging. And here's some philosophies that we can give you, but no one is the best. And you really need to kind of embrace your own. And then so when I started writing C Sharp, I did all those things you just described in .NET Core using its logging mechanism, and I had this very complicated logging configuration, and I couldn't find a ton of documentation or community examples about it, and it was a little bit frustrating. But it's because everyone we do it the Microsoft way, and it's the right way, and it's good enough.
Yeah. I guess you can make like just the code that you want, but just the code that you want is like how often do you deviate from the actual standard way of what people want? It's like 5% of the time maybe, so it's
yeah, but you have to have a Microsoft that can define that standard and have enough weight behind it that people stick to it. And that's what Java doesn't have. So they don't have a Microsoft. And so everyone wants to talk about their way of doing it because it's the best way, and they've just figured it out. And there's no standard way of doing it because there's no one to say that this is the standard way of doing it. So I agree. I think for a lot of things, you can have a standard way that's good for 95% of the use cases, but you never see that in Java because you don't have that Microsoft.
Yeah, that's a really good point on, on it. Yeah, now I'll unmute others if they want to ask questions. Everyone can speak, I think. If you rejoin the channel, you should be able to speak. If you want to, I can actually unmute manually.
It looks like I can talk without
Yeah.
rejoining. I just unmuted.
Yep.
All right. Well, I have a question. Well, I guess a statement I used to say to people when you said that if you aren't starving for your project, you're not doing it right. I used to say that if you're heading up against a brick wall, then you're probably doing it wrong. But I kind of went the other way with that. But I don't know. So you say you like Java at all? Because yeah, I'm not a fan of Java myself. I tried it back in the 90s. I said, nope, this is not going to work for me. I kind of passed on it. I heard it's a lot better now, but once you get your feet wet, you don't want to head back into it,
Yeah,
So,
I did it a lot, and I don't use it for my personal projects anymore. And I've gotten to the point where my Java knowledge has really decayed. Probably, I don't know. There's all this new module stuff, and it would take me a little while to get back to speed in Java. I wouldn't, especially now with .NET Core, I wouldn't recommend Java over C Sharp. Um, I wouldn't now. I wouldn't ever justify either converting something that's already in Java to C Sharp either, though. And I wouldn't turn down a job in Java if it was something I was interested in. But if I had my choice, I would work with C Sharp just because, as I was mentioning, there's a lot more guidance, better documentation, and just simple ways of doing things. Now, in the past, yeah, Java was a lot rougher, but then so was C Sharp. It was Windows only, and there was a lot of quirks and oddities here and there that got cleaned up a lot as the conversion to core.
Yeah.
I think we're in a state where C Sharp has really improved a lot, and I would say Java got somewhat stagnant when I was working with it. From 7 to 8 to 9, it all felt kind of the same. I remember when Java 5 came out, it was a huge difference. Whereas C Sharp feels like it's moving in the right direction and has a lot of change behind it and momentum behind it. And I work a lot with TypeScript and JavaScript, Python, and just it can be kind of fun to try something new for a while and take away, here are the things that I think they do actually pretty well.
yeah, I kind of noticed that with TypeScript. It's I'm starting to get into it. It's like, okay, it makes more sense than JavaScript. So I'm learning to adapt to it. Uh, I'm just I guess the age. I don't know how old you are, but it seems like when you get older, you just kind of get more reluctant to learn new things because you just have that feeling that I'm going to learn it and then tomorrow it's going to be out and I'm just going to waste my damn time on it.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yes, I'm like 34, so I still got some youth in me, I think.
Oh yeah.
Although my knees don't feel that way, but but I would say, yeah, no, I understand because I agree. I used to know a lot of Flex, and I knew a lot of Sencha.js was a big framework. I knew a lot of jQuery, and I can tell you that knowledge does nothing for me today. So it's like how many um, relics and old fads do you want sitting around in your knowledge?
Yeah, and then it's in today it's Angular and Vue, React, and I don't know if I want to learn all those.
Yeah. I think the trick there is that all of them are often rehashing and relearning. There's some core truths behind it, and they're all relearning those truths again and again and again. Like Angular, I feel, is just yet another way of presenting model view controller and how you build a UI application. And so
Yeah.
I think you need to kind of grab one of those until you really understand it, and then once you understand it, the next one comes along and it's a new fad and it's got a lot of new energy behind it, but the lessons you may have already learned, and so you don't learn as much learning the next language.
Yeah, I kind of noticed
Yep.
that too when I started out in VB and went to C Sharp. Picking it up wasn't really too hard because it was mainly the same. Syntax was different. Uh, it looks like the same thing with this TypeScript. Angular is a little different, but I don't know. It just seems like every 5 years, everything turns on its head. Everything comes out. It's like, ah, crap. All the crap I just learned is out the window now. Now it's this new, shiny nickel. I
Yeah,
don't know.
there's a time when Ruby on Rails was the big thing.
Ruby, Young Rails, yes, in 2012. That was big.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now no one knows what that is. Perl, right? Everyone did a ton of Perl a while ago, and now that doesn't help you at all.
No, it doesn't. Right. I think we have one of the guys on our team is a developer. He develops in Linux. He does some Perl. But other than that, I don't think he ever uses it in his real life. So
Every now and then I'll write some code, and it'll involve some heavy use of regular expression or really complicated if statements or something like that. And so I'll make a comment of it. Look, I'm writing Perl.
Ah, there you go. So how do you like Python? I've been in it a couple of times. I thought, nah, I'm not gonna like this, and I kind of bailed back out of it. I have a feeling that if it really picks up steam, I'll get back into it. But how have you dug into it?
Common sense would always say when I look at Python that it can't be used for enterprise level applications because it's just so kind of undefined and squishy. And well, there's not that so much that it's just they really embrace duck typing, so you never know what type anything is, and they really like they don't like you doing a lot of type checking. That's not very Pythonic. So if you get something, you should be testing if it's a string or a bytes. You should just try something, and if it fails, you catch it. And just all these kinds of things that make it feel like there would just be a lot of really subtle bugs if you tried to build a large application in it. And so that's always kind of everything I work on. It seems like, well, even if there's not going to be a large application now, it has the potential to turn into something really large. And I'd hate to write it in Python and then I can't maintain it. And yet at the same time, Python is just growing in popularity.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me either. Now I think it's only really growing because it's used in a lot of scientific applications where they're doing research and they're not writing industry level code that they're going to have to support for a long time and have a big team working on and stuff like that.
TensorFlow neural networks also great for Python.
Isn't it also a cross-platform?
Yeah, it's really good cross-platform like scripting language. So if you need glue somewhere, that's going to be sort of universally accessible. It makes a good job for that.
I do see a couple of Pythons in our work, and usually I see it because whatever is calling it breaks. The code breaks and it says something.py, and it's like, well, that's Python, so it's sitting on. It's not my department, so I don't worry about it. But that's about the only time I see Python at work. So I guess it's being used here, but not too well.
Yeah, it's got a really great library, like standard library, and libraries are around it. So if you want to, there's a lot of things. If you want to do it, it's only a few lines of Python code. Like if you want to read a file and replace every line with something else, it's not a lot of Python code. So you start your application starts out doing a lot with a little bit of code. And then to get that kind of last 20%, your Python application ends up ballooning in size to take care of all these little odd use cases, things like that. And it's not just my Python code. I've worked with other teams that have written a lot of Python code, and it always starts out looking really cool, and then it ends up ballooning into a monstrosity.
Everything, doesn't it?
I feel like Java and C# are a bit more resistant to that, at least. Or at least if it's going to balloon into a monstrosity, it's a monstrosity of tons of interfaces.
Yes, it's
over-engineering.
consistent.
Yeah, that's about the time you realize that this is a fuck up, and by that time you invested so much into it, you can't back out. So now, you got to keep beating the elephant, right?
Yeah, I would be scared today to invest a large project into Python. You know, that's what I was kind of saying. Like, I always worry that it just doesn't care enough about the details, which is great when you're starting and prototyping. I don't have to care about the details. I can do all this stuff, and then when you want to really flesh it out, the details start to matter.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's like one of those quick fixes kind of thing. I can just get in there, start coding it, and get it done. I guess,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I guess another question would be, I've done this a lot. I do this almost religiously. Is that I'll start a project, get a structure down, and then tear that structure down, restart it, tear the structure down, restart it. I'll just keep doing it 9, 10, 11, 12 times before I'm satisfied with it. Do you do that too?
Yeah, and I'll do a lot too of I'll start up one project and I'll get that structure, and then I'll start up. And more like I'll get distracted, I'll go work on something else. And then rather than reuse my structure, it's like, well, there's a few glitches in it. I'll do things slightly different here. And there was a time, I think, in my career where I felt like it was always improving and getting better. And I was going to have like the perfect application template, the perfect kind of initial structure. And then you do it enough times and you realize you're not actually moving forwards, you're just moving sideways.
Yeah.
If I sidestep enough, I'll get forward somehow. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
what I've noticed in my career was there's now a template that fits everything. There's always like MVVM can't go everywhere. Sometimes it's just overkill to do it. But it's kind of like how you said in dependency injection and inversion of control. When you start using it, then you start using it everywhere. Then you're like, well, God, I can't do it just regular anymore. I have to do this dependency injection crap, and I just want to make it a simple hello world, and now I'm putting a dependency injection into it. Why? But I think that's just part of the learning things. You learn it
Yes.
and you try to put it everywhere.
Yep.
And you can, as far as you can even answer why, you can say, well, it's a hello world, but I do need dependency injection because I need to make sure that I'm not repeating myself. And this is structured for expansion so that, if I need to write hello world in more languages, I'll be ready to do that.
Right? Got to put a new front end on that thing. Just might need a
And
console front end to put.
It needs to be
exactly.
testable.
Yeah, it's got to be.
It's not over engineering because I'm not writing the actual other front ends. I'm just putting in the hooks so that if I needed to write those front ends, I could.
Right.
Yes.
I'm just saying that because right now I'm building an app for work, and it's just a monitoring app. And believe it or not, I'm putting MVVM in front of it just because it's WPF. And of course, I'm running into problems, But I'm just thinking, if I just didn't do it this way, I just put code behind and just ran it that way. I'm not testing the stupid thing, but it's that. Well, I learned, and I'm going to put it everywhere, kind of thing. I I think it's just a dev thing. I don't know. It's a.
And you learned. I mean, I did hear somewhere that it's not necessarily just developers, but people in general overlearn negative lessons. So every time you get bit by something, in an application, then you become paranoid of that. And I can say when like working with someone and reading through their code, you can often learn what they got bit by in the past. Sort of like, oh, I can see you really had a problem with null in the past because you've taken great steps to prevent null from being anywhere in your application. And I can see that you really, you had some trouble with race conditions in the past because you've gone well out of your way to make sure that you have these really clear multi-threaded patterns. And
Yeah,
it's like a
everything is
challenge.
under a lock.
It's funny. I don't see that. Usually, what I see in code is, well, your logic starts on this class, it jumps to this class, it goes over to this class, comes back to this class again, goes to this class. Then I'm thinking, where the hell's this thing going? That's what I usually see in code. That's
Oh
when I
yeah,
usually walk up and I want to throw the mouse and just walk out.
No, I would say so. That Java C# thing. One of the nice things about Java and having to learn through stepping into other people's, third-party libraries and things like that, is it does sort of help you understand the problem they're solving more. Like I used to have a really good understanding for, I'm forgetting the acronym now, but the persistence, whatever Unity framework, Hibernate R, that sort of object map persistence. I really understood the first level cache and the second level cache and all that kind of stuff because I was stepping into Hibernate, things like that. So you do get good at kind of reading code and learning more that way. Now, the C# developers not running into those problems and they're just progressing on their application. But as a Java developer, you do learn, I feel, more than you would as a C# developer.
Oh, okay. So you're saying like the .NET shelters you a little bit?
Yeah, it shelters you so you're not forced to understand the full complexities of the problem just to get it to work. Whereas Java, it feels like so often you are kind of forced to understand it. Like with the logging thing, logging's just working, and I have my logging.
Yeah.
But I don't really know why it goes to that file or how I would configure it or change it or something like that. Whereas Java, it's like, oh, I know in great detail why my logging is going to this file and what exactly is happening, how I could change that.
I think a lot of it's maybe just over engineering. Somebody thought of something, got a bug up their butt, said, well, on the full moon on the third Tuesday, we have to make sure this is covered. So, it's over engineered, I think. I think that's just a problem with devs. They just over engineer things. They think about the most wildest thing that could ever happen. Oh, we got to cover for that. and then they look back on it and they find out, you got your car's made, but the tires are on the roof and it's riding sideways down the road.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things with open source programming. If you have people whose goal is and they're very passionate about building a logging framework, well, 90% of people aren't going to need much from that. But if that's what you're set out to do, then you're going to definitely build all of the different bells and whistles you might possibly need. So,
yeah. I would see that as more of the extensions of the framework. Make your framework just logs normally, but then if you wanted to, make it log in XML, whatever, then make that an extension. That way, it's not put into this log where I have to, I have to go into configuration and put 15 lines of code just to get logging to happen. And I go to that point. And it's like, yep, done. You're uninstalled. You're gone.
Yep.
I don't have the patience for it anymore. I like the things to work. I just want to install it, a couple lines of code, wrap it up, go. And I think, what is that one that Cerilog?
Cerilog,
Is that
yes.
the name of it?
Yes.
Yeah, that one's a nice one. That one's pretty straightforward and easy to learn. There was another one I ran into, Nlog. I think it was a
Nlog, yes.
little bit better, but it can get messy. But,
Yep.
Other than that, I've usually seen people try to write their own logger at enterprises, and
Oh,
I'm looking
no.
at that. Oh yeah, and it's binding up the app. Maybe we should put multi-threading on it. I'm just sitting there going, yeah, sure, okay. Put a new paint job on the car, and that will fix the flat tire. Sure.
Yeah. When I was first working, there were sort of two components that were the main components. One, and the other component had their own custom logging solution because there's no possible way that a logger could write to a log file quickly enough for them. They had to do all of this compression and weird tricks to log anything. And the end result was that they just didn't log much at all because they were so paranoid of logging becoming a performance issue. And then when it came to debugging time, they never knew what was going on in their code. It was just someone would run into an intermittent problem and they would spend months trying to reproduce it. Whereas we had a ton of logging, we run into an intermittent problem. And it's kind of like, okay, well, let's get out the forensics team here and we're going to sit for a day staring at these log files and going to figure out exactly what happened. It usually worked out pretty well. But yeah, I've seen custom loggers done before. I've never seen.
I've ran into this problem even with this job, is that you usually have to find a balance in logging, right? and things like this place logs everything. This person clicked this button. Why do I care? Why do I care if they pushed a button? I just want to know what the app is doing. But uh, it gets to that, and Genesis is the big one for this one. They're a telephony company, and they'll log everything. One day, it's over 1.2 gigs of logs every day, and they can only keep the logs on the server for I think 7 or 8 days until they run out of space, and then they got to start purging the log.
Wow.
and and now you think that's bad enough, but you go into the log and you talk about a monstrosity. It's like you'll be the user connected to this vector, and then all of a sudden there'll just be this dump of the vector, and it's spaced, it's indented, it looks weird as hell, and then it has like a little ID. Well, you use that ID, then somewhere down, I don't know, probably another 1,500 lines is where that ID continues because it's logging a whole bunch of calls at the same time. So you got to trace this that way. You got to find that ID, go to the next part, go to the next part. That's how they log these things.
I've worked on one of those before, and I wrote a full MVVM application for reading the log files. And you would pick one, and that would color code everything else that had the same ID, so you could easily kind of trace what was happening, and you could filter by ID, and look where things connect. And you end up with just 30% of your application is actually a script, a tool that you use to read the log files for your application.
Kind of like
Yeah.
SharePoint logs are the same way. They just like dump. That's kind of what they do, and then you have to use this tool that I think is on GitHub that will tie it all back together so you can see why the error happened.
There are many tools like that. There's Grafana, there's Splunk, there's App Insights. Though App Insights is a bit different. It's like an alternative of where you log stuff rather than logging itself, like a logging aggregator itself. But yeah, Splunk is a decent one. We're using that with work. You can literally just click on a message entry. Let's say it was a JSON, and you can construct filters out of parts of a message. For example, if exception had HTTP status code, you could click on HTTP status code and make that a filter.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I will add is that I've seen, just as time goes on, applications, developers have a lot more to learn, I feel, but also an easier and easier job. Like, tools get more and more powerful over time. Things get more and more understood, and the applications that people are building are more and more complex. And you'll see people out there saying, "Oh well, the applications they build today have so much bloat, and they're so slow, and they use so much memory." And there's truth to that, but also it's just the applications people build today are so complicated.
Yeah,
and they can do so many different things.
I heard that argument too, but let's face it, man. Today, memory's cheap. Memory and storage is very cheap. So if it takes a couple, 100 meg to run an application, is that slowing down your computer? Doesn't slow mine down at all. Maybe if it is, maybe you should reconsider getting an upgrade on your computer. I think you're using one from 1988.
The focus is different. We don't care, simply.
Yeah, to me, it's. I think today it's more about getting the product out the door as quick as you can. Or back then it was computers were, P166, right? I mean, you can't make it. You have to make it fast, right? You can't make it flashy and beautiful and doing all this multi-threading crap because the computer just look at you and going, really? I'm not doing all this. So it's. I think today it's more about the beautification of all the crap behind the code, and responsiveness, and to do that you just sacrifice your memory.
Dedicating it to another person rather than machine, more like it.
Yeah, that's what I've seen nowadays. It's like you look at websites now. It used to be I went to a website and read information. Now it's an ad bucket with a bunch of animations and weird partial page postbacks, where it's like, where there's no information here anymore. Now it's just an ad bucket. I don't know what to really.
It may be stealing all my information and spamming me with advertising and hiding all the information, but wow, it is a lot more complex, and I have to admit that would be a lot harder to build.
Right, yeah. And I could see that in the enterprise world, where an enterprise website, yeah, you want different parts doing different things, but there you go. That's a good example. It still reminds me of the Homer episode where you put all those animations on a website.
Yes. Yes, I remember. With
Ain't nobody
Jesus
wanna.
in the middle, wasn't it?
But that was my AOL website back in 1997. Oh, here we go. I'll put all this animation on here, and isn't it cool? Yeah, but that was back in the day. Usually websites you can go to and read about somebody's game that they like to play, or somebody's learning how they gardened or something like that. Now it's just here's a picture of my butt, stuff like that.
Yeah, now there's only like 20 websites, and
It's about right, yeah. And I don't know.
and you guys all say, I see that we sound like a bunch of old people sitting here talking about it, but all of you young people, I see that too already. You look at YouTube and you say, "Oh, I remember back when I was watching YouTube, there were so many different independent content creators and, really good people, and now it's just the same 10 streamers that are commercially supported and things like that." So you're going to fall into that trap too. So, don't call us old.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it'll happen. I've heard a lot of people my age say that the golden age of the internet was in the late '90s, early 2000s. And after that, it just kind of slowly slipped down. I don't know. I just kind of go with it, right? Oh,
Yeah.
they said that that's where the you would go on the internet, you would type in whatever you wanted to learn, and the first 10 pages that show up will be something you can learn from. And nowadays it would be, well, you're not going to learn it. You're going to download this software that we created, and this will help you learn it. Well, I don't want that. I want to learn. Yeah, so it's a little different nowadays. It's about tricking the SEO, whatever. But
I'm amazed at how much people today can learn from videos. It's very strange because, YouTube was just sort of coming out when I was in college. It was not really a part of my learning whatsoever.
same
And
here.
now people will say, oh, I want to learn how to do such and such. I'll go find, some video where someone does that. And it's like, that's not how, if I want to figure out how to solve a problem, I want to find a nice, clear documentation page with a lot of words and an example. The last thing I want to do is find a video where someone is solving it in the video, because it's just, I don't want to watch a video to learn something. I want to watch a video to learn. It's so strange to me that people use videos to learn.
I think what I've learned in life is I think it's how people learned the first time is how they learn forever. So we learned by reading. So that's how we learn, right? We watch a video and we're like, I can't pick any information out of this. Where I think the younger folks, they learn by video. So that's how they learn. And you give them a page with a bunch of words on it, they're going to go, I'm not reading all that. Screw that. I'll watch a video.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, in the same way, I watch a video, but it's for like high level. I'll see how they do it, because most of the time when I watch a video, I don't see the problems they run into. Where maybe in a tutorial, I can, well, if you get this error, you're gonna have to do this and that. Oh, okay. Well, I got that error, so I know how to fix that now. Where on a video, you never see that. That's just perfect every time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I want to see somebody struggle. And like, oh, well, there's an error here. Okay, I got that error too. How do you fix it? And you do this and that. Okay, cool. All right, I can do that now. So that's why I avoid videos unless I just want to do a high level. But again, that's just my take on it. I learn different. Okay, I will not learn Go. Sorry.
It's 12 minutes, man. Good investment.
I might have to learn Go one of these days. It's starting to pick up steam at my company. So more and more people are using it.
It takes only 12 minutes, so
12 minutes and you're a master.
Yes, you see the video is right in front of you. Just click it and run it, and you're a master.
I can see my 12-minute application will probably somehow format C. How the hell am I doing here? Be that old guy that's the computer. How do I use this thing?
What's this master boot record? When I first installed Linux, I was, I used Windows in high school, and I was a super computer person. And then at college, my roommate was a huge fan of Linux.
it's like, what are you doing running Windows? If you want to be a serious developer, you have to run Linux. And yeah,
One of those, yeah.
you know, I didn't learn Linux and enjoy it. I can switch back between the two. But man,
Yeah.
like it broke my computer 5 times over trying to install Linux on it. It just felt like every day I would do some kind of update and then I start it up and it would say Xorg has crashed and this long explanation about why my computer won't boot up and something about the drivers and some configuration file had to change. It's gotten a lot better, fortunately.
Yeah, I've avoided Linux in my past, so I'm starting to get into it. I'm just being careful with it because I don't want to run into that problem where I do something and then it's all starting all over again.
Yeah.
But I'm smart this time. I'm putting it in a VM. I'm doing snapshots when I do a change, which is I guess good if I was in IT to do that. But it's a learning experience, right? You get to learn.
Yeah.
So at least you now found different ways how to not do something. Do not do this.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, I just got too used to Bash, and it's so useful to just kind of have that shell around all the time. And I should learn PowerShell, but I just can't get myself to do it then.
I think if you know .NET, you know PowerShell. That's what I know. Is the syntax is a little different, but it does run on .NET. So you just think of it that way. It's like .NET, but it's a little different.
All right, I don't know how long this interview is, but probably I gotta go here at the hour.
It's already done, actually. It was really good, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh no, yeah, that was a lot of fun. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you as well very much. Bye. Good luck.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
See ya.